Hello, and welcome to the Spiritual Warrior Podcast, where we investigate what it means to live fearlessly on purpose. So, in each episode, we have a different guest who will share with us some practical tools and real life examples that will inspire and inform us to live fearlessly on purpose. I'm your host, Bob Cirino, and today joining me all the way from the United Kingdom is the esteemed James Boag. So, James was originally from the UK, but since growing up, he's lived in several different continents along the way, earning multiple university degrees in literature, language, and an extraordinary passion for the wisdom traditions of India. He lived in Mysore, India for a while when he complemented his degrees in French and Italian with a master's in Sanskrit, or as I'm sure James would prefer, Sanskrita, and a deep dive of study into what he calls whole life yoga, integrating sound, song, movement, meditation, story, and inquiry, all to help others realize their most authentic embodied selves. So, James, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Lovely to be here, Bob. I missed a little bit of what you said there. Like I got to integrating and then the sound cut out momentarily. So
All
hopefully
right.
that's
The recording will have it be continuous, but for our
okay.
sake, I'll repeat it.
Yeah.
Integrating sound and song, movement and meditation, story and inquiry, all to help others, including ourselves, realize our most authentic embodied selves.
Oh, lovely. Well, thank
Is
you for
that
such
a
a
is that a
kind.
bio that fits, James?
That's a very kind introduction, Bob. Yeah, thank you. I'm very happy to speak with you today. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I first saw James on Instagram, and he was posting some really beautiful content, and I said, "Wow, this is an individual who has a serious practice." And I loved reading on your website and your work about this idea of authenticity, because James, that's one of the things that attracted me to you and inspired me to invite you to come onto this podcast. Is that you live very authentically. So I got a question for you. Well, at least from my perspective, you seem to live quite authentically. So, James, when you're saying this language around authentic self or embodying authentic humanity, what does that mean to you?
Um, well, for me, and this is something that's been part of my studies in India and with my Sanskrit teachers and within the yoga tradition, the idea is maybe you and many of the listeners will be familiar with this term dharma. So this Sanskrit word dharma, which at the nominal level, if dharma is a noun, it means the essential quality of something. So, for example, one of the dharmas of water is its liquidity. It flows. It will follow the path of least resistance. One of the dharmas of a rock would be a certain solidity, for example. Dharma as a verb is from the root dra, which means to support or sustain. So when these two meanings come together, we can think of dharma as the type of action that is authentic, but also supports the well-being of the whole. And so as a human being, one of our dharmas is this quality of conscience. So sometimes people talk a lot about, oh, consciousness. Yeah, great. But as a human being, as well as being conscious beings, we have this thing called conscience. And so there's the idea, if we look out at the many gurus that surround us in nature, we can see, for example, the oak tree being unapologetically, unabashedly the oak. It doesn't look
I've
across
never
the
thought of it like
valley.
that before.
Yeah, it doesn't look across the valley and see the olive tree and think, oh, I wish I was an olive. Then they'd have a big party for me in the autumn when they do the olive harvest. They just come and lay against me in the shade, and they sometimes cut off my limbs to build stuff. Sometimes they give me a hug, but they never throw a party for me, unlike the olive. But no, the oak just continues being its oak self. Similarly, you don't see, cats don't try to be dogs, for example. But human beings have this particular capacity. We can be less than ourselves, and we can ignore the guidance and the directives of this pilot light of conscience. And so for me, the path of yoga towards deepening authenticity is this reattunement or recalibration with conscience. And so the practices that are sometimes referred to as satya, one of the yamas in Patanjali's 8 limbs in the Yoga Sutra. Satya is from the verb as to be. So it means, sometimes people talk about it as truthfulness, but sat is true in the sense it is, it's real, it exists. So the practice of satya isn't just about truth telling, it's about being truly present here and now. And what does it mean to be truly present? Well, I think as a human being, it means to show up with all of ourselves, including those parts of ourselves that sometimes maybe have been neglected or ignored, maybe even denied or suppressed, and integrate all of that. So for me, an authentic yoga practice and an authentic way of being means to rehabilitate all of ourselves, to remember all of ourselves, to invite all the members of the gang of our being to come into cohesive togetherness so we can actually savor the amazing opportunities of life in a more joined up, cohesive way, because we're meeting life with all of ourselves. So that would be a beginning to that huge question.
Yeah, I figured we'd start at the top. So you talk about aligning ourselves or realigning ourselves. One of the things that our listeners are really interested in is living on our purpose. So what is our purpose? And then how do we, if we get knocked off our purpose, how do we get back on our purpose? So when you say align ourselves and realign ourselves, what are some of the ideas behind that in your practice and in your life?
So it's a great question, Bob. And like you say, you guys, we're going right for the big things, which is great. So I'll take recourse to the Indic tradition again. And there's the idea that as a human being, what is our duty? What's the purpose of life? From the perspective of the Yoga Sutra, we are here to learn, to enjoy, and to become free. And it's actually our duty to enjoy life. And when we're enjoying ourselves, we can actually learn more quickly than if we're not having a good time. Of course, we learn through hardship and challenging times, absolutely. But children, for example, when they're having a great time, they're in a playful mood, this can create so much new synaptic connection and new growth and a total recalibration of the sense of self. So when we feel threatened, when we feel insecure, it's much harder for us to change our understanding of who we are. And changing our understanding of who we are is one of the foundation practices of yoga. Yoga begins when we own, admit, recognize, okay, I'm not really in a state of yoga. I'm not as joined up, integrated as I could be. Sometimes I get in my own way. Sometimes I do things that are not in my own highest interest. And maybe I could do something about that. So once I acknowledge that and I come to that recognition, then I could see, can I realign myself in such a way that is more harmonious? But that process would begin or depends on me acknowledging that I'm maybe not as joined up, well aligned as I could be. And so what to do about it? Well, once I acknowledge, sometimes I get in my own way. Once I acknowledge that I have tendencies or habits or patterns that are not really so helpful, then that's already empowering. Once I've acknowledged that, I can do something. And so when I see, sometimes I have this habit to just move along in an autopilot way that is no longer in keeping with my deeper longings and my true desires, then that would be like, I'm a little bit misaligned. I'm not really pointing in the direction I'd like to. If I carry on in this trajectory, I'm going to get more and more off course. I'm not going to be really living with the type of purpose I would like to bring forth. So what can I do about it? So for me, the idea of aligning or attuning is doing what I can practically to bring myself into this state of what I sometimes refer to as at-one-ment or attunement. So as a human being, Yeah, so as a human being, I have all these different instrumental powers. So we have the gifts of our minds and our emotions. We have these capacities of sensing and perceiving, of acting and doing. And so yoga works with this map from the Sankhya system, which is so beautiful, so practical. So I've got these 5 sense powers, I've got these 5 action powers, 5 action powers of speech and expression and language communication, manual capacities, picking up, putting down, shaping, forming, movement capacities, locomotive capacities, digestive, assimilative, excretory, limitive capacities, and then creative, recreative capacities. Now, these are amazing powers that we have, but sometimes they can all get disjointed and pull us in different directions. Maybe you've had the experience in life, like your sense power of sight. I'd like to look at something like this. Oh, and then you hear, oh, I don't want to go and listen to that. I'd like to taste this. We can feel ourselves pulled in different directions by different senses, by different inclinations, by different desires. And when we do feel pulled in so many different directions, how does that feel, Bob? Do you enjoy feeling split, torn, fragmented?
No, of course not.
Yeah, no. But what human beings can also experience is now and again, and it might just be for fleeting moments, we taste this experience where it's like the thought, the word, the action all line up. And how does that feel? It's like I exit time almost for a moment, and I feel this fullness. And when I'm experiencing that, it's like all these different powers are attuned. They are in accord. They're in harmony. And so for me, the whole process and practice of yoga is this cultivation of a deepening, more robust, resilient harmony, one that's adaptable, this dynamic equilibrium. So it's not a fixed point. It's as I cultivate my awareness, I'm better able to calibrate and recalibrate and respond to the inevitable changes and challenges of life from a center that's more balanced. So just like when we're learning to walk as a child, we're developing all our proprioceptive capacities so we can put one foot in front of another and stay on our feet. And every time we stumble, we learn what it means to be able to balance on 2 feet and walk forwards and perhaps backwards and side to sides and eventually pirouette and run and jump and all the rest of it. Similarly, in yoga practice, it's about learning to stay balanced in this amazing arena of life with all these different influences that push and pull us in different directions. So sometimes we'll stumble, sometimes we'll come out of alignment, we'll come out of tune, we'll come off balance. But if we are doing the basic yoga practice of doing what we can to be alert, to be attentive, then once we notice that we're off, then we can come back. And when we take recourse to yoga techniques like meditation, for example, cultivating the medi state, once we've invited ourselves into that, relatively speaking, tuned, balanced state, we've got a reference. And when we come away, we can notice a little bit more easily and then invite ourselves back to the center, perhaps a little bit more skillfully than we might have been able to do beforehand.
And so you're identifying that state of alignment is as a state of meditation. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
The,
how
I
would you
call it
describe?
go on,
Oh,
Bob. Yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, sometimes I talk about, so what is meditation? Meditation is the cultivation of the medi state, the state of being centered amidst all the different comings and goings.
Mm. I love that idea of having a reference point,
Mm-hmm.
because life is, you get curveballs all the time. Things are always
For sure.
changing. And
Yeah,
so to have a reference point, am I on purpose? Am I off purpose?
yeah.
That idea, like being centered in the purpose, I think it's interesting. People will say my purpose is a certain activity, but then,
Mm.
or my purpose is to achieve a certain thing. But I think it's
Yes,
interesting when we say that my purpose is to be in a certain state.
yes.
That's my purpose. And then when I'm not in that state, then I need to navigate and realign with that state.
Yeah. No, I think one thing I've kind of learned from experience as well is one has to be careful about defining one's goals or one's purpose because all sorts of things can happen. Like you say, life will throw curveballs at us. It's going to bring the unexpected. And so many years ago, I came to try to remind myself that what I'm really seeking is to share a certain type of energy, to be in a certain type of vibration. And that can then allow me to, maybe I won't always be able to share in the ways that I would choose, but whatever life is demanding of me, based on the changing circumstances, can I show up there in an energetic configuration, let's say, and with a certain type of balance or frequency that then allows me to share in that unfolding situation in a way that my conscience is happy with, and after which I can sleep in peace at the end of that day. And so I'm aiming to maintain a certain type of energetic quality and a presence of awareness, rather than it being any particular external activity or shape or narrowly defined thing.
So, I had a really nice conversation with James before this, before we hit record, and he is a man of many, many methods. But James, in this idea of this certain kind of energy or this certain kind of vibration, what was one of the earliest ways that you started to tune in and access and tap into this energy or vibration?
My first experiences of this, might call it transcendent state, were playing sports as a child. I just got so absorbed and I got so high. I experienced it playing tennis and football and basketball. And for example, in my teenage years, I was really into basketball, and I just had I had no control over when it would happen. I practiced a lot, I trained a lot, but now and again, I would get into this zone and nothing else existed. I was just there on the court, totally absorbed. And that activity was demanding my mental, physical, emotional, sensory presence. All parts of me were fully there. And it was such a blissful experience.
Mm.
And this, I guess this, together with my I don't know, inborn inclination of this sense of there is something more than all of this, a sense of the divine or a sense of the mystery or a sense of God, if you like. And it made me realize, yeah, there is something more than all of this. And I also experienced some quality of that through song. And then later, I remember I went rock climbing the first time outside when I lived in Thailand. And for a moment or two on the rock, I had this same experience. And this was around the time that I was really beginning to get into yoga. And then I remember one of the next times I went to a yoga class or did a yoga practice, I thought, yeah, this is where it's at. I don't need to be on a beautiful rock face. I don't need to have any equipment. These methods can allow me, and I don't need to have lots of other people who are playing the sport in the same spirit I am, and everything's just functioning together really well today. My body feels great. I can actually invite this experience of deep presence and cohesion with minimal equipment, with just my own presence, the agency of the breath, and then my kind of journey into yoga techniques really began. And then not long after that, I also learned to meditate. And so I was working with yogasana, and then I learned to meditate, and I learned to sing Sanskrit songs and Sanskrit recitation. And all of those methods are things that I've used daily now for 20 plus years. Yeah.
Lovely. I really relate to that. I'm a jazz bassist. Well, maybe not so much
Mm-hmm.
anymore, but I used to play a lot of improv jazz, and
Mm.
you just get into this state where the sense of me as an individual and then the sense of us as a group became
Yes.
indistinguishable, and
Yeah.
it was this area where you didn't think anymore.
Mm-hmm.
yet you were executing wonderfully, right? And
Yeah.
it's just this totally creative and expansive and buoyant state. And
Mm-hmm.
and I remember, and I was also an athlete growing up, and it was the same kind of thing where there's periods of time where there was nothing else other than the present moment, and that was
Yeah.
so freeing. There was nothing
Yes.
else to worry about, nothing else to think about, and you're in this flow with the present moment in a
Yeah.
deep state of connection.
Mm.
And I remember one of my teachers told a story about one of their students was a rock climber. Not to pick on that, but he would go without the ropes, and the teacher was
Mm.
like, "You're putting yourself in such a state of risk. You can reach that state without even moving. I can show you how."
Yeah.
And and that for me was fascinating because I thought that that was dependent on the method. But what I've
Yeah.
come to learn is that you can access that state very intentionally in a number of
Yes.
different ways, including, but not limited to, just sitting still in a state of
Yeah.
meditation.
Yeah. No, when I learned to meditate from my teacher, this was in Thailand in the early 2000s, and I had been to a concert, which had been I had a friend who we liked similar music, and whenever there was a an event happening, she would always say, "Oh, James, come to this." And this was a band that I wasn't a fan of theirs. I didn't really know their music that well, but she thought they're really great live. So she persuaded me to join her. We went to this concert, and they were excellent. They were really. I think they were in that state that you just described, Bob. Like they were playing together, and their togetherness invited the audience into this togetherness, and so there was this beautiful experience, like just a collective being absorbed in this beautiful experience and lovely music. And I told my meditation teacher about this, and he says, "Yeah, well, what we're going to learn, you won't need the concert, you won't need the band. You'll be able to access it much more regularly, much more independent of those particular externals." And to me, that's just one of the great beauties of the yoga traditions, the way it invites the individual human being in simple ways to become more fortified and more resilient, to give us resources we can use to be more independent and to not be so dependent on those unpredictable externals. And in the face of unpredictable externals, to have this like home base or have this inner sanctum from which we can then move out with greater poise and with a little bit more easefulness amidst the inevitable challenges that will surely come. Yeah.
So, speaking of challenges, as I was going through your bio, you've done a lot of different things that totally uprooted your life and moved you to an entirely different continent in a culture that didn't speak necessarily your language. So I want to hear about you following your purpose as you went through the winding journey of your life. What was that like in the context of what we've been talking about here? How did that help guide you in your decision making?
Well, I think, I was very fortunate that age 11, I grew up in England, but when I started learning French at school, the very first year, I went to stay with a French family. My mother, when she was a schoolgirl, she'd had a French pen friend, and her sister had also been the pen friend in the same family. This French family had 5 daughters, and my mother and her sister, they were both going in the summertime to stay with them. And it turned out that my aunt's pen friend had 5 sons, and the middle of them was born like literally 3 days apart from me. So even before I was born and he was born, our mothers had already made the plan. Oh yeah, when they start learning the other language at school, then we can do an exchange like we did when we were girls. And so that's what began. That's what happened. And when I was 11, I went to France. And that very first year, I had the experience of how this different language allowed me to experience different things, to feel different things, to express myself in different ways. And it was like, wow, this is great. And I already had a sense, age 11, yeah, as soon as I can, I'm going to go to different places. I'm going to go to different cultures, countries. I want to learn different languages. And I was always attracted to Italian. And so then I went at university, I studied French and Italian. And I was also very fortunate when I was a schoolboy, age 16, I was given, well, I asked for it, but I then had the opportunity to coach a younger team of basketball. So I was coaching younger students. When I was like 13, we had this coach who came, and she played for British universities, and she started coaching us, and it was great. And she took me and some of the others. We joined the local men's team. So by that stage, I'd had quite a lot of coaching, and I wanted to pass it on. And so age 16, I started coaching the younger students at the school. And I really enjoyed just sharing. When I was a teenager, I was really into basketball. So I was basically sharing what I was passionate about. And I found it so rewarding. And I didn't think of it in these terms at that point. But what I subsequently realized was happening was a yoga. Basketball was the object around which we would come together to explore and learn and grow and expand together. And I wasn't the most popular student amongst the teachers at school. Some teachers liked me, but some didn't, because there's various reasons. But once I started coaching these younger kids, some teachers who previously hadn't particularly cared for me, they changed their attitude because they saw that some of the kids who'd been like bad boys were now starting to behave in a different way, because this ethos that we were cultivating in the training and like respecting each other and making the most of that time. And so I had the experience as a teenager of, when I'm sharing what I love, it's super fulfilling. It's enriching. I learn so much, and I enjoy sharing, and other people benefit from it. This is a win-win. I love doing this. I also started teaching French to younger kids because I got quite proficient in French, having spent so much time there in the summer holidays with this family. And so by the time I left school, I already knew this teaching thing, I kind of love it. This is really enriching. It's fulfilling. It's rewarding, and it helps me learn. And then, so during my studies, I also taught a bit of French and Italian in a local school when I was at university. And then there was the opportunity to go to Japan and teach English. And I was just keen to go to another country, another culture, like France and Italy, England. They're all different, but they're all European. And I thought, I want to go somewhere really different. And the job opportunity to teach, I thought, well, I know I really enjoy teaching. And I know that learning a foreign language was so inspiring, transformative for me. So I'm super enthused to go and teach English in Japan and be a kind of cultural ambassador. That was part of the job. I'm totally up for that. And then when I did go to Japan, I found it so wonderful to be in this very different culture. And when I returned to Europe, I kind of missed that. And then I looked for a job that would allow me to continue this journey of exploring different languages and cultures. And a job came up in Thailand, which was very interesting. I had a role in curriculum development at a school, as well as teaching and coaching basketball. And so I went to Thailand, and then I got offered a job at a university, which was amazing. And then I met my meditation teacher. I started studying yoga. And once I started teaching at the university, I also had the chance to start studying Sanskrit. And so this thing of teaching really felt purposeful to me. And I felt like, yeah, this is the right job for me. When I was teaching at the school in Thailand, there were a couple of other foreign teachers. And one evening we're chatting together, and one of them asked me, oh, what would you like to do? Because this was like a job you would do for a year or two. And then one of them asked me what I would do, and I mentioned a couple of ideas. And then another guy, one of my classes, what do you mean? You're made to be a teacher, so forget about it. You're going to be teaching somewhere or another. I was like, yeah, I do enjoy it. And then as I got more and more into yoga, I was taught at the university for 3.5 years. My first couple of years, I was learning so much. I worked with wonderful students. I had lots of great colleagues. It was really fun. But I got more and more into yoga. And then I had a full-time job at university, part-time job at yoga studio. I'm studying Sanskrit. Something had to give, so full-time job at university gave. but it felt very purposeful. It felt like, no, it wasn't so much a question. And then when I gave everything up to go and study Sanskrit in India, it almost wasn't like a choice. It was like, of course, At the time, I thought I needed to go and do a PhD in the US because that's how one would be able to continue to study Sanskrit. But then once I went to India, I was like, oh, wow, I can study it here. And this is what I want to do. So I'll just stay here. And so I think for me, every time I've gone to another country or culture, it's always been with a sense of purpose, as you suggest, Bob. And so that's made it easy. I was also very fortunate it was called the JET program, the program that I went to Japan on. And there's a lot of support on that program. We got a lot of education about the realities of culture shock when one goes to live in a different culture over a period of time. And I had lots of great colleagues. There were thousands of people doing the JET program around the country. And I had great friends in my prefecture where I was living. I had great Japanese friends, great colleagues. So I had a lot of support along the way. But when I went to India after living in Thailand for 7 years, it was a big change. But again, I was just super motivated to learn Sanskrit. So I knew that this is where I need to be. And I went to India. It took me a long time to get to India. Once I got there, then basically I moved there and spent most of my time there for the next 4 years. And then I had a base in India for 13 years.
So James,
I guess purpose driven.
I want to jump in with a question real quick. When you gave up your full-time teaching position to go study Sanskrit, a lot of people would probably be terrified because that's their income, and now they're going into something that's in some ways uncertain. And one thing that I really try to dig into in Spiritual Warrior is not only recognizing what is our purpose and living on purpose, but being fearless in living on that purpose. So take us back to the emotions that you were feeling when you were making that decision to kind of give up this, in some ways, social safety or something that was culturally status quo, or, a lot of people would say that makes sense. Wait, you're going to go study Sanskrit and give up that? A lot of people would say that wouldn't make sense. So did you feel a sense of fear? Did you feel a sense of fearlessness? How'd you navigate through that?
Well, there's a number of factors that play into it. One is that when I lived in Thailand, my income was very modest. So I taught in a school and then I taught in a government university. So the salary was enough to live on. And that's all. Mm-hmm. So I could pay my rent and eat, and anything else would be from additional income. So I did some additional work. I did quite a lot of editing work and sometimes did translation work. And if I did interpreting work, that would pay for international travel and things like that. So I was quite used to having a modest income. But all I was doing, I was spending all my time practicing yoga, studying yoga. I occasionally go to the cinema, and that was very, or go to the theater, have a meal out. But just in Thailand at the time, you could eat out very, very reasonably and have wonderful food. And so it was a place where I could live doing what I wanted to do on modest means. But I was just so inspired by it when I met my teacher, and it was just so magical. And I was feeling very fulfilled, and I had enough to eat. I was eating what I wanted to eat, and I had a place to stay. I could study, and my work at the university had been super nourishing and rewarding, like in the more holistic sense, been very satisfying from the professional perspective. And I learned so much working with, wonderful students and great colleagues. When I left my position at the university to teach yoga full time, and then I was supplementing that with editing work, that was quite a shift because there was no. That was already like a significant leap, because I was basically giving up that rather prestigious full-time position because I wanted to study Sanskrit. But I knew that there's no way you can study Sanskrit. Like, I can't continue studying Sanskrit with like doing 3 or 4 hours a week. If I want to learn this language to the degree that I wanted to, which was to be able to interact with Yoga Sutra, Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana in the original, understanding what it meant. And I realized there's no way I'm going to get to that stage anytime soon unless I really, up my focus. So I think sometimes when I'm teaching, I'll say, why does anybody start yoga? There's obviously a gazillion reasons, but if we just pare it down to two: fear and desire. That's not pain and desire. So you asked me about fear, but pain and desire. Something is paining us, something is troubling us, and we would like it to be different. We would desire that it would be different. So I had this strong desire to learn Sanskrit, to go deeper into this tradition, the teachings of which I was finding so supportive, so helpful. Like when I studied the Yoga Sutra and the Bhagavad Gita with my teacher, like we began with Yoga Sutra, and I just realized this is a text that I want to have by my side for the journey of life. And this is not something I'm not going to be able to develop that personal relationship with the text unless I know Sanskrit. So I had the motivation. So I think my desire was so strong that fear was just kind of dissolved in the face of that desire. And to me, this is the idea of the power. Well, I don't want to sound cliche, but this is the power of love to dissolve fear. When we're living, I have a good friend. I have a podcast, the Whole Life Yoga podcast, and I've interviewed he was my colleague at the university in Thailand, Bill Wharton. He was a US Marine captain in Vietnam. And I think it's in one of our published conversations, Bill said to me more than once, discipline is useful. It can take you a long way, but it'll only take you so far. When things are really difficult, when things are really on the line, the only thing that will withstand is love. So when you're practicing, when you're studying, when you're working, when you're doing the things that really count, you have to do it with love. And for example, with Sanskrit, the first time I sang in Sanskrit, it was like, wow. I'd sung in lots of languages before, and I enjoy singing a lot. But when I sang in Sanskrit, like, whoa, this is different. And then when my teacher began teaching me Kashmiri recitation, like, whoa. So when I was struggling away with the Sanskrit grammar in the first couple of years, and I was doing my teacher, she's such a beautiful person at the university in Thailand, Ajahn Tasani Sinsakun, an amazing teacher, so gracious and so experienced, she had such a deep authority and wisdom, but we would be using a textbook from the 19th century. And I don't have a background in Latin or Greek. So it was a little bit tough going. And so on a weekend, I'd be there doing these exercises, it'd take hours. And anytime it got too difficult, it got heavy, I would just sing, I would just recite. And then I would be reminded why I was doing it. Because the text I was reciting, this is what I want to get that deeper access to. I can feel it's so potent. The understanding I've already gleaned has already been so helpful and supportive in my life. So I would say that the desire and the love made the fear not really a problem. And I mean, it's now 20 years that I've been really dedicating my life towards yoga, I would say. And when I was doing my master's degree, I funded my time in India in the first 2 years by doing simultaneous interpretation jobs. And then I said to myself, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to support myself by sharing what I love. And I've managed to do that ever since, but it's not been easy. And several times over the years, I've felt like, maybe I just need to go and learn to be a carpenter or something. So I'll just set up a gardening business or something, because sometimes it's been really difficult. But every time that's happened, I get an email from somebody who studied with me several years back telling me how it's still so helpful what we did together. Some message comes in very clearly, and I know, no, this is what I need to do. This is what I need to do. And so the sense of love and the sense of purpose has carried me through fear and doubt many times. Yeah.
So for the listeners at home who are thinking about maybe a challenging experience that they're in, where they're like, oh, maybe I should be a carpenter, maybe I should be a gardener, for whatever version of that is for their life. What would you recommend to them as maybe a tool or a technique or a method to tap back into that love that feeds their purpose?
It's a great question. I think, I would if somebody was asking me in person, the way I would respond might be quite different person to person. But more broadly, what I think I might offer is, one thing that I often return to. Sometimes people describe yoga as the art of living, and I always like to say it's the art of living and dying, because you can't have the one without the other. So how would you like to die? We're going to die one day. Hopefully, we have some time to really drink deep from this cup of life for many moons to come and many years and decades to come. But when that moment comes, how do we want to meet it? And I would like to meet death feeling ready, feeling fulfilled, feeling like I really lived fully and I honored this gift of life. So I'd like to be able to die in peace and contentment. And how will I be able to do that? Well, I have to practice. Yoga recognizes everything we do is training. We get good at what we practice and we get not so good at what we don't practice. So if I want to be able to meet death feeling ready, feeling serene, feeling calm, feeling fulfilled, then I better practice. And how will I do that? By practicing sleeping in peace at the end of every day. And how will I do that? The best way I know is by doing my best, which it might sometimes it'll fall short of the mark, but I keep doing my best to make each day the expression of my conscience, the expression of my deepest, most genuine longing as I understand it now. And Krishna in the Gita makes this very clear. Once your conscience speaks, if you follow it, it's a win-win situation. Because if you fail, if you don't get what you're aiming for, if you die, figuratively you go to heaven, in the sense that there's no regret. But if you succeed, then you enjoy and savor the results with a clear conscience. So it's a win-win situation. And on the other hand, if my conscience tells me to do this and I shy back from it, no, I'm not going to do that, then how am I going to feel afterwards? In my own experience, like anytime my conscience gives me a clear directive, if I go with it, it's never a bad outcome. It might be challenging. I might go through difficult times, but I do sleep better at the end of those days. And anytime my conscience tells me to do something and I don't, it's never worked out particularly well. I will suffer sooner and or later, probably sooner and later. So for me, the answer is like, on purpose, is like, well, what's going to help me? What's going to help you sleep in peace? What's going to bring you a sense of contentment? What's going to help you feel more serene? That biblical quote, you shall know them by their fruits. What's going to be the fruit of acting in this way? We've got no control over Krishna makes this very clear in the Gita. What you do is up to you. Your action is your responsibility. We have no control over the outcomes. We don't know what the fruits of our actions will be, but nonetheless, don't be the cause of unnecessary bitter fruit by acting in bad conscience. And don't think that not acting is an option. We've always got to act, so let's just act as best we can in accord with our conscience. And
so, James, that's very beautiful, but it's also extremely challenging at times to stay strong.
Bigger the challenge, bigger the opportunity.
Yeah. So how would you relate that to being a spiritual warrior, like the warrior aspect of following your spirit or your conscience?
This is why there's many reasons why. This is one of the reasons why the Bhagavad Gita is set on the battlefield. This is one of the reasons why in the Yoga Sutra, the magisterial Yoga Sutra, in which Patanjali shows his jaw-dropping genius, after he tells us what yoga is and what yoga practice is, a few sutras later, 20th sutra, the first chapter, Patanjali tells us the essential qualities for yoga practice. And he starts off with Shraddha and then Virya. And what is Shraddha? Beautiful Sanskrit word. It's etymologically related to the word for the heart. Sometimes it gets translated as faith, but the Sanskrit word doesn't reach out its meaning in the same way that the English word faith does. Shraddha is the faith, confidence, conviction that comes from putting things to the test in the arena of your own life, your own experience. So it's a self-confidence, it's a self-trust. It's the faith that comes from experience, but from genuine, honest, faithful exploration. And then virya is such a beautiful word, virya. It's related to vira, which means it denotes a hero or a heroine, but it also denotes human being. So the very word vira for human being, it tells us in Sanskrit, in order to be fully human, you have to be heroic. You have to be courageous. What does it mean to be a hero? The way I understand it is the hero or the heroine is the person who has the courage, the strength to stay true to his or her conscience, even if the rest of the society is flooding in the opposite direction, even if that means doing something we've never done before. And this is why you have to be a warrior. You have to have courage. This is the foundation. I think Maya Angelou, the great poet amongst other writer, she's credited to say, but it's not an original idea, that courage is the foundation virtue, the most important virtue, because without courage, you can't enact any other virtue. But this is an ancient idea, and it's there in the yoga text too. So spiritual warriorhood, as I understand it, this is a topic that I sometimes speak on at great length and do whole weekend workshops on. So, but just for the key points, there's a yoga asana, a yoga posture called Virabhadra. And Virabhadrasana A or Virabhadrasana 1, the person is standing with one foot forwards and one foot back. So symbolically, it's incarnating the way we move through life, walking. And both feet are rooted to the support of the earth and the arms lift up to the sky. So one foot forward is figuratively reaching into the future. The other foot is anchoring us in our previous experience. And we're connecting all of the elements from the earth, water, fire, air, and space. And in this posture, it's very striking. There is a beautiful sense of openness all around the spine. So it's spacious through the whole field of our being. And when we do this posture, if Mr. Iyengar, for example, talks about doing this posture, you want to feel this vital presence in every cell in the body. You want to feel even support from the front and back leg. You want to feel even spaciousness on the front, back, both sides of the torso. You want to feel this animation in every cell and every pore of your skin. It's like it's present, it's alert, it's noticing, it's attentive. And so where will the enemy approach from? Once we start the path of yoga practice, we're basically set in motion a process of uprooting habits that have become obsolete, ways of being that are no longer serving our deeper longings and our higher interests. But those old habits and ways of being, they're part of existence. They've been living in the field of our being, we might say. Like anything that's alive, it wants to stay alive. So those habits, once we say, oh, habit A, thanks for being with me all these years, but it's time for us to part ways. You're no longer helping me. So long. Does habit A just walk off into the sunset saying, thanks, ciao? No. What does habit A do? It realizes,
life.
It holds on for dear life, but what it might also do is kind of just go into hiding. And it might change its clothes, put on a new outfit. It might lay low for a while. And when we said, oh, old habit, I'm no longer going to be dominated by you. I'm going to move in this different way now. When we said that, we were feeling clear. We were feeling resolute. We were feeling balanced. But then perhaps one day we're feeling tired. We're feeling weary. Oh, it's been a difficult day. It's been a difficult week. It's been what a month it's been. And at that moment when we're most vulnerable, old habit just pops up and extends its hand and says, I'm still here. Let's do the old habit. And before we even realize it, we're back in the old habit. This can happen, yeah? So this is the enemy. Where did it creep up from? The blind spot. So the Virabhadrasana asana symbolizes, amongst other things, this, what I call a 360-degree global equivision. That is the weapon, if you like, of the yogic warrior, awareness. So when we become more aware, we will see more. There's this beautiful image in the yoga tradition of the lake. You know, if I go to the lake and it's windy, the surface of the water is ruffled, and even if the water is clean, I don't see very deep. So this is like the field of our awareness. When it's very busy at the superficial level, it's so perturbed. and I don't see into the depths. But if the wind subsides and the lake becomes flat, it becomes like glass. And if the water's clean, I'll suddenly be able to see way deeper. But I might not see all the way to the depths. I might get a little glimpse of that light that never goes out deep inside. But what I'll also notice when I peer into the lake is like, ooh, oh man, there's a lot of trash down there. How did I let that accumulate? And then I realized, oh yeah, I let it accumulate. And also, whoa, not just trash, there's a whole sub-aqua cave network. And in those caves, oh no, those caves are not empty. There's all sorts of monsters down there. Oh, and I've got to excavate that network. I've got to harmonize those deeper realms within my psychic field. But not only that, when I look into the lake and it's all got still at the surface level of my awareness, not only do I see deeper into the depths, but I look into that water and what do I see? I see myself. I see my reflection. So the more we practice, the more we cultivate awareness, we're going to see things that we would really have preferred not to have seen. But once we've seen them, there's no unseeing. So yoga is going to demand of us. It's going to demand that we go into the dark, into the unknown, again and again. It's going to demand that we face down those parts of ourselves, those tendencies that we've previously ignored, kept in our back pocket, but now they've come into our conscious awareness. And yoga works because it fortifies us for this work. There's the idea we cultivate the metta state, we experience some degree of balance and harmony. It feels great. And so that fortifies, it encourages us. And so when that next challenge comes up, actually we're ready for it. It might feel overwhelming, but really it's like, no, the practice is working. I'm in the integration game and my whole system is rejoicing. And now it's bringing up to the surface the next thing that wants to be harmonized. It's like when we sing, for example, Om Shanti, 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 what are we praying for? We're praying for peace, but what does that mean? We're asking for trouble. We're asking to bring to the surface those tendencies we've been harboring that would impede our experience of sustained peacefulness. And we have to do the harmonization work. But that will require courageous, sustained effort and commitment. An effort and commitment with a spirit of service for the sovereign, for the sovereign in the Indic tradition is the one who looks after the well-being of the whole. And the warrior is the one who serves that. So this committed, diligent, wholehearted service for the sake of the well-being of the whole, this is the this is the basic of yoga practice. And in the world today, lots of people don't really get initiated into that type of commitment in early life. And yoga is here to invite us into that path of committed practice and spiritual heroism. But spiritual heroism, it's nothing outside ourselves. Like, I could ask you, Bob, where do you come from? I can ask, if I meet one of the listeners, where do you come from? There's many accurate, honest ways to respond. One, I come from the same place you do. I come from my mother's womb. And because we come from the mother's womb, we've already made a tremendous heroic archetypal journey from the archetypal comfort zone of the womb, where everything is familiar, comfortable, steady food supply, basic needs met, to then go into the vast unknown of the breathing world of duality and change. We've made that leap. So this capacity to go from the known to the unknown, from the familiar to the vast expanses into the mystery, this is what our soul is here to do. And we are ready to do it. Sometimes we forget. But this is the beauty of the yogic path. When we make that courageous, wholehearted effort, it is always its own reward. As Krishna says in the Gita, no effort on this path is ever wasted.
Woo! That was excellent, James. Thank you. And
thank you.
I think your barometer of can I sleep well at night tonight, so that I'm prepared when it's my last night, metaphorically, that I'll be a warrior. Could never go to sleep knowing that there was the enemy out there and not doing anything about it. I think a warrior can go to rest, even if they lost maybe the battle of the day, but they went out to pursue, and they went out to engage, and they went out to face that thing. They had the alertness to find it. They saw it, and then they pursued and they endeavored. I think that's a very beautiful, that's a beautiful idea. And the path of yoga is winding, and we have to navigate that through the wins and through the maybe the temporary losses. But as you said, any endeavor is not lost when it has that
Yeah.
courageous motivation.
Yeah. I mean, one way, there's various ways you can think about this, but one time I was speaking to he was my grandmother's brother, so my great uncle, and he had been involved in the trade unions movement in the United Kingdom. This is a long time ago, last century, and he had witnessed many times corrupt politicians destroying things that ordinary people had worked for. And one time I was telling him about a project that some friends of mine were doing. They were creating a yoga retreat center in the mountains. And it's this beautiful project. And he cynically said, oh, some corrupt politicos will come and destroy it. And I said to him, well, even if that happens, and I don't think it's going to happen, but even if that happens, that I know that these people will lose nothing, because every day they are doing this project, they are investing into an account that never depreciates, because they are working as the expression of their deepest love and commitment to share and give. And so every day they endeavor in this project, their soul is at ease, and that can never be taken away. Yeah, somebody could come and destroy the project, but nobody can take away that repeated action of doing what one can to express one's deepest longings and to act from a place of love. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Well, James, thank you so much for getting on this show and sharing your stories and your beautiful analogies and wonderful philosophy. We started with talking about realizing our dharma, our essential quality, our authenticity of the thing that supports the whole. And you helped inspire us to be like an oak who is unapologetically an oak. So may we be warriors in our spiritual endeavors as unapologetically as an oak is an oak, to realize our true nature and align ourselves with that. You said, what is our duty as a human being? What is our purpose as a human being? And it's to go in that endeavor to realize that, to learn, enjoy, and then ultimately become free. And when we're not feeling like we're connected with that, we can recalibrate ourselves to that sensation or that sense or that feeling that we've had of that connectedness, of that being supported and integrated into the whole. And then you gave us a huge array of beautiful analogies I won't summarize.
The other thing I didn't mention about the purpose in the Indic tradition is the idea that we should leave things better than we found them. We should honor our parents, we should honor our ancestors, we should honor the gifts of nature by leaving things better than we found them. And I think in order to do that, especially in the times we live in, that requires courage, that requires a real commitment. But it's one that I see people all over the world incarnating every day. There's so much inspiration if we allow ourselves to look for it. It's easy in the world today to get a little bit downhearted because of various influences, but everywhere I've been, I've met so many people who are really living genuinely in a very inspiring way. So if one commits to this path of spiritual warriorhood, one is never alone. And I'm of the persuasion that any time a person acts in accord with conscience, it imprints into the collective. It gives others more permission to do that. And so it's its own reward, and it is an empowerment.
Wonderful. Well, James, thank you so much for coming on the show. If anybody felt connected to anything James said, I really encourage you to find him on social media, go to his website, get connected, sign up for the next Spiritual Warrior weekend. I mean, I think I'm in for that one. So if you felt connected to James and you want to stay connected, James, where can they find you? Where can they follow you?
Thank you for asking, Bob. So my website is jamesboagyoga.com. So that's just my name, and the surname is Boag. So jamesboagyoga.com. And on my website, you can sign up for the newsletter, which goes out not too often, but fairly frequently. And that's the best place to hear about all my offerings, like whether it's online courses, in-person gatherings. I also have the Whole Life Yoga podcast, which is on YouTube and various audio channels. And I'm not the most adept social media user, but I do have at James Boag Yoga on Instagram. But the newsletter would definitely be the best thing. If you sign up to the newsletter, then you'll know what I'm up to. And I'd be be great to meet more of your community, Bob. And I hope we can converse more before too long. Thank you for inviting me today. It's always a pleasure to speak to you.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much, James. If you like this podcast, please give it a rating, give it as many stars as you think it deserves, and follow it on whatever platform you're accessing this on. And if you like what you heard and you want more of it from great personalities and great minds and warriors like James, you can follow me on Instagram at bob.cirino and join our online community at spiritualwarrior.life/home. And with that, my friends, I wish that you live fearlessly on purpose. Until next time, thank you.